What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get the city love.
This is an episode I wish I never had to record, but I don't feel I have any other option. For several years now, former 102.1 The Edge and Fan 590 broadcaster Dean Blundell has been relentlessly defaming me. I've wanted nothing more than for him to leave me alone. But with his new attacks this past Tuesday, I realize he's just going to double down on the false accusations with more personal attacks. In 2018, Dean Blundell recorded an episode of his podcast in which he made up lie after lie about me. At that time, I was so upset that he would spew such rubbish into a microphone that I recorded an unnumbered episode of Toronto Mic'd with my rebuttals. I'll include that audio at the end of this episode 1066. To give this story proper context, I need to speak of former 102.1 The Edge and current Q107 broadcaster Fearless Fred Kennedy. I've never met Fearless Fred, but there are several posts on TorontoMic.com in which I cover Fred's Toronto radio career. He started at 102.1 The Edge in 2009, and in August of that year, he did an interview on a comedy blog entitled From the Back of the Room. This is a direct quote of what he said. There's some radio site called Toronto Mic, or Mike in Toronto, or something. It's a prototypical website that's full of people who've either been fired or are just starting out and are already jaded. Basically, no matter what happens in the radio business, they're the people who will always say it's for the worst. Joe Blow gets fired, and it's the worst thing that has ever happened in radio ever. Even though, when he was on the air the week before, they trashed him without remorse. All that typical nonsense. At the time, I was puzzled by Fred's remarks, because it didn't seem to be about TorontoMic.com. It was as if Fred had my site confused with another blog or forum. Then, in 2011, Fearless Fred appeared on Humble and Fred's podcast. Howard was aware of those comments Fred said about me. Here's that audio.
Okay, dude, now here's the time to get a little honest. So the podcast here at humbleandfredradio.com is up. And by the way, I failed to mention this in the opening, that our buddy Mike Boone, the legendary Toronto Mike, has put up a how to download this tutorial on our website if you want to go check it out. And I understand, actually, now that I think of it, isn't there a little history, Fearless, between you and the legendary Toronto Mike?
No, there's no history. He just hates me and wants me to die or something. He doesn't hate you. He
doesn't want you to die. Listen.
I don't know. I went on the website when I was first hired, and it was basically like, it felt like a rallying cry to like bring me down, and it's frustrating because I think people really forget that we're human beings.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And it was frustrating because there were people that were like really going out of their way to make this difficult, and I don't think they understand that at that time there was a lot of family problems going on in my life as well. So it was really, really frustrating because I was dealing with things on a personal family side, dealing with moving, dealing with a new job, and I can't express how frustrating it was. I would never I would never treat anybody like that. And it's frustrating. It sucks, you know?
And you know, if he's the kind of guy, he's been a friend of ours for years. He's the kind of guy that if you guys met, you would like him and he'd like you.
But the thing is,
I wouldn't want to meet him. Like, I don't want to like act like I wish bad things on the guy, but I have no inclination to ever speak to the guy or anything.
He's gonna love this.
But Fred, he's one of those guys that thinks he owns the edge. He's a part owner, and nothing's supposed to change.
Hang on, Fred. Kelly Catrera wants to say something.
It's different for me because when I started, people were like using this to track down my wife. They were sending Photoshop pictures of her to her, and it was all started through that website. Like, it gets me really frustrated. And they don't that attitude is sickening to me. It's really frustrating, and I'm getting like
Hello,
I'm getting flustered about it because that was real life. That's a line that's been crossed.
Wow, he's getting into real life.
I'm glad
right
to
now.
hear
There's
this
a lot
from
of
you, man.
emotion on the Humble and Fred show this morning. Fred, it's Kelly Catrera.
Hello, Kelly Catrera.
I took over for May Potts. Try doing that, my friend. Sweetest woman in the world, and then I took over on the edge for her, and that was tough. But I'll tell you, Mike Boone, Toronto Mike, if you can trust anyone, trust me. He's a good guy. Met him when I first came into the Humble and Fred headquarters, and I'll tell you, I actually, this maybe is a plea to Mike Boone. If you could just start writing nasty stuff about me, anything on the website, I would kill for a job right now. I mean, nasty. Just
but I want to say
you're getting paid to broadcast.
And I love Mike. I spoke to him on the way in today. But I'll say this about what Fred's saying. People don't realize, because we both, Freddie P. and I, have had some horrible things written about us. That yellow board, that radio board, Fred. You know, they said some things. There was a whole blog in the early days of blogging, a whole blog dedicated to basically mocking Fred and I every day, and it used to drive us nuts.
You know, that stuff's fine, though. Like, to me, like, you expect that. I mean, you could go online and find, like, websites dedicated to deriding Charles Adler, who's one of the most successful broadcasters in Canada, and that's fine. Like, I'm totally
no, but these guys
okay,
were saying some personal stuff, and it got really ugly for a while there.
Been crossed,
but we put ourselves out there. Like,
well,
we really put
but
ourselves
I don't put my wife out there.
No.
That's not about. It's not like that. It's the same as when you see like paparazzi like attacking somebody outside of the school when they're picking up their kids. I mean, maybe somebody who's on a talk show or something signed up for that, but their kids didn't. That's not fair. That's stupid. And when people try and defend that kind of behavior, it promotes it. People think that that's okay. And generally speaking, the people that are doing that are so desperate to belong to it. They're really just trying to attach themselves to it. But
I know what you're saying because we did a promotion at Mojo. It was a father and
which was a great station, and
absolutely.
when I was a young lad starting in broadcasting, you guys were like icons to me because of what you were doing.
I think Fred's gone crazy because there's no commercials.
No, no, you're right. Mojo was a great. I mean, Mojo should still be alive to this day, but that's besides the point. Remember, we did the father and son thing. So the trip, the idea was you won a trip with your dad to come with Fred and his dad to Florida to see a football game, a hockey game, a basketball game. And I remember on that Dumble and Fudd board, somebody wrote, what's worse than going on a trip with Fred Patterson? Going with Fred and his dad.
Aww.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, to me, that was over the line.
Oh, yeah.
I could take it.
The thing, I don't care what people say about me.
When I heard this, I knew Fred had the wrong guy. I actually performed a content audit of everything I've ever written about Fearless Fred Kennedy, rereading every word and every comment left on those entries. This was rather time-consuming, but I wanted to be sure that nothing slipped between the cracks, and there was nothing about Fred's family, his wife, or his personal life. Again, the most critical it got was commentary on Fred's ability as a broadcaster. Even when Humble, Fred, and Kelly Catrera try to reason with Fred, he won't hear it because he's clearly decided he hates me and I'm a horrible person. That was 11 years ago, and I never heard from Fearless Fred again. But periodically, Dean Blundell would take shots at me that were completely unfair. Again, At the end of this new recording, I'll append the recording I made in 2018 so you can hear for yourself. On this recent Victoria Day long weekend, Jennifer Valentine posted a Facebook video about her treatment by Q107 radio personality John Derringer. This was 1 month after Jackie Delaney made similar remarks about John Derringer on my podcast, Toronto Mic'd. Then, Andrea Ruse, Maureen Holloway, and Supriya Dwivedi went public about these allegations. That's when I created a page on TorontoMic.com to aggregate these allegations against John Derringer. This prompted Dean Blundell to say the following on his podcast of Tuesday, May 24th, 2022. The individual that Dean Blundell is referring to is John Derringer.
And I'll also say this, that a lot of the people that have come forward to dunk on this individual who has since been fired as of this morning, that show does not exist.
Is that
Yeah, it's official.
confirmed?
Official.
Yes.
That his show does not exist. A lot of fucking losers are coming out to dunk on him right now. Like this asshole Toronto Mike. He is the biggest piece of shit on this planet. He is a radio jock sniffing piece of shit who's using like legitimate terror of individuals on all sides of this to up his profile. Stay away from him. He's human fucking garbage.
I should point out that most of the women who have made allegations against John Derringer have reached out to personally thank me for that post and for being an ally. The worst person in the world? Human piece of garbage? Why is Dean Blundell attacking me like this on such a public platform? This really upset me because it was so grossly unfair, and there was no opportunity for rebuttal. My friend Brother Bill, who was friendly with Dean, even tried to intervene because his rhetoric was so nasty and unwarranted. When Mark Weisblot from 1236 visited me on the first Thursday of June, something he's been doing every month for years, we talked about the allegations against John Derringer, what Chorus was doing about it, and Dean's comments about me. In that episode 1060 of Toronto Mic'd, I publicly asked Dean Blundell to stop and leave me alone. On Tuesday, June 7th, Dean defamed me again. This time, I wasn't going to stand for it. These bald-faced lies were abhorrent because I was being accused of things I never did. Allow me to play this segment of Dean Blundell's podcast and respond.
I hadn't heard of Toronto Mike until you mentioned him last week, R.E. the Derringer story. I listened to the most recent episode, and wow, you are mentioned a lot. His guests are not a fan of you either. As someone who listens to your sketchy radio show, his words, not a radio show, digital, every day and looks forward to it, I beg to differ with their critiques, including ridiculing your website. The guest goes over your history at the edge and your excuses for being let go. And then Mike says he has a final word about you. My wish for Dean Blundell is he would just leave me the fuck alone and go pick on someone else.
So the episode that this co-host of Dean Blundell is referring to is episode 1060 with Mark Weisblot from 1236. Again, Mark comes on every single month, typically the first Thursday of the month, and we talk for 3 hours about everything that happened in the previous month. Note that laughter from Dean Blundell when his co-host quotes me as saying, "Leave me alone." That laughter. Wow.
And this is new. I haven't said, I didn't share this with you guys on purpose because it was almost too good. I want to do it live.
Pick on someone else.
Yes, he lumps you in with Derringer and Mike Stafford, no relation to Matthew Stafford of the Rams. As radio people, we should be glad are gone. Every time I thought that they were moving on to another media story, they returned to Derringer, Blundell, etc.
So this analysis of the Dean Blundell discussion and the John Derringer discussion that took place in the first part of the episode 1060 with Mark Weisblot from 1236. These, of course, are Mark Weisblot's takes, his spin on things. As FOTM Blair Packham recently said, in these 1236 episodes of Toronto Mic'd, I typically recede into the background. So these opinions and takes belong to Mark.
Then they added a link to the podcast. So, of course, I did my due diligence and clicked the link. And the podcast was 3 hours and 15 minutes long. Oh. Same runtime as Fellowship of the Ring.
It's a long time to be bothered by me, isn't it? 3 hours and 15 minutes.
Can you guys... I'm 31 years old.
An hour on you.
Episode 1060 is actually 3 hours and 7 minutes. But again, every time Mark Weisblot visits for one of these monthly episodes, it's at least 3 hours. And it's been that way for years. And no, we did not spend an hour on Dean Blundell. Not even close.
Full disclosure, 31 years old. I don't know who Toronto Mike is. Can you guys fill me in as to who this is?
I've never heard of him until Dean started shitting on him last week.
Yeah, I had no idea who he was until...
Is he a jock? Is he like...
No, he's... how do you describe him? I don't really know. He's like this mini blogger who, like, when I came to Toronto, it's kind of a funny story, because when I came to Toronto, there was like these pictures of me when I was working in Windsor saying this guy's coming to Toronto. And I'm like, I have no idea who this guy is. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I started seeing shit posts about me being like a piece of shit or a loser. And he was friends with Humble and Fred, who I think he works with right now, Humble and Fred.
Not sure what a mini blogger is. And I don't do shit posts. I've never called Dean Blundell a piece of shit, nor a loser. Not once. The worst I might have said at the time that Dean Blundell arrived to take over for Humble and Fred at 102.1 The Edge is that he wasn't my cup of tea.
He's the producer on their
who that is either.
podcast.
I don't know. No idea.
And I think he might have been, I think Toronto Mike and again, I don't know for sure, but I think he may have actually worked with Humble and Fred when they were on that 640 thing. That men's radio thing.
But they are all together now.
Guys,
they do each
they're
other's
together
show
now.
all the time too.
For the record, I have never worked a day in my life in radio. Never aspired to do so. Never applied for a job in radio. I had nothing to do with the Humble and Fred show on Mojo Radio 640. So there I'm being mistaken for somebody else. But for the first time, we hear something that's accurate. I do produce the Humble and Fred podcast.
So he, just to kind of brass tacks it, what he is he, I have no idea. He's been obsessed with me for 20 years. So, and obsessed with Fearless Fred. Like he was the guy that put out all these like Photoshop pictures of Fred's wife getting gangbanged.
So this is the doozy that prompted this episode of Toronto Mic'd. Here, for the first time, Dean Blundell is shedding some light on what specifically has him thinking I'm the worst person in the world and a human piece of garbage. Here, Dean Blundell says, I'm responsible for sharing photoshopped pictures of Fearless Fred's wife. This is something I absolutely never did. I've never written about Fearless Fred's wife. I've never spoken about Fearless Fred's wife. And never in my life have I photoshopped anybody's wife into any photos, let alone a gangbang photo. This is not me. And here Dean Blundell is sharing this lie on his very public podcast. This is why I'm so angry.
What?
And it was on his platform. Said that Fred caused Martin Streak's death. He perpetuated that rumor for a long time. Fred was getting threats. His family was getting phone calls.
I remember.
That's the guy. That's the guy.
This is the other doozy. Never once, not one time, through any of my digital channels on any platform, did I ever suggest Fearless Fred Kennedy was responsible for the suicide of Martin Streak. That never happened. To suggest I perpetuated this myth and somehow spread this in the public realm, resulting in these emails that Fearless Fred allegedly received, is gross, inaccurate, and unfair. What would you do if a former Toronto radio morning man went on his podcast and spewed these lies about you?
So when Derringer got fired and the first article about how terrible Derringer is was written by this guy, I thought, fuck, what a grandstanding cock, which he is, right?
That article I wrote after Jennifer Valentine released her Facebook video was me aggregating the words and messaging from women. I actually never called John Derringer terrible. And if you read what I wrote that day, the allegations against John Derringer, I never voiced an opinion on the matter. I remained completely objective, intentionally so, and let the alleged victim's words speak for themselves.
And then I was reminded of the kind of individual this guy was after Chris told me, he's like, I got to read you this article. It's about this guy. I won't tell you what's in this email we got, but it's about this guy, Toronto Mike. And I'm like, fuck it. I'm pretty sure that's the same guy that when Martin Street died, started perpetuating this rumor that Fred's hiring led to Martin Street dying, and Fred got, and you can talk to Fred about this. Yeah, hundreds of emails and threats from people associated with this guy. Pictures of Fred's wife photoshopped into like a porn gangbang. Like, ask Fred about it. He'll tell you about it. We talked about it at golf like last year, I think.
And here's the source of these lies. Fearless Fred Kennedy. They talked about it at golf last year, according to Dean Blundell. And that's why I tried so hard this past week to get a private conversation with Fred Kennedy so I could tell him he's got the wrong guy. This wasn't me. I'm not responsible for any hateful emails Fred received about the tragic suicide of former Edge 102 DJ and host of Live to Air's Martin Streak.
Like, he's not a good person. And on top of it, my understanding is he is such a compulsive liar that it's like, he apparently runs a media business with no clicks and says, I got millions of this and hundreds of thousands of that. Just nothing. He's just a nothing.
I don't know what to say about that. Dean Blundell calling me a compulsive liar is just too rich. Wow. I've never lied about my audience or my numbers. I don't know what he's talking about. Anyway, let's listen to a little more here.
Who's the guy he had on with?
So I'm not shocked because he's literally
like Nardwar.
No idea who he's talking about. I have no idea about any of this stuff because it's like this guy is almost like a noisy dishwasher to me, right? Like just whatever. He's there. You can kind of hear it in the background. And he's such a fucking wiener. Like just one of those, Locke, these guys like radio wieners who like never got a chance to be on the radio, always wanted to be on the radio, would practice into their microphone and then got enough money to grab like enough money for like a podcast or something like that and then put it together and then started interviewing his favorite radio people. He's asked me to be on his podcast like 100 times. And every time I'm like, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you.
Maybe of all the lies that Dean has been spreading about me over the last several years, this is the one that always shocks me the most. This idea that I've been begging Dean Blundell to be on my podcast hundreds of times. Yes, I've asked Dean Blundell to come on my podcast at least 3 times, but obviously not since his podcast episode about me in 2018 that I responded to in 2018. And again, I'm going to append that unedited in its complete form at the end of this one. Again, I have never wanted to be in radio. I'm not a failed radio person who couldn't make it in radio. It's obvious to me that Dean Blundell doesn't know anything about me or what I'm about or what the Toronto Mike universe is about. And he says as much. He doesn't know. And then he makes up a bunch of shit because that seems to be his MO.
And then I remember one time we did a show about the fact that I wouldn't go on this guy's podcast. This is years ago. And he faked and cut together this fake interview about me like I was talking to him or something. It was the weirdest. It was like stalker shit.
Oh,
where I'm like, this is fucking bizarre.
There, Dean is referring to that episode I mentioned from 2018, the unnumbered episode. And when you hear it at the end of this one, you'll realize there isn't a human alive who would think I cut it together to make it look like I was interviewing Dean Blundell. That's just another lie. It's obvious what I'm doing. You'll hear for yourself in a few minutes.
So he's kind of like a radio stalker is what he is, like an old wiener radio stalker who thinks he's somebody, and he's nothing. He's just miserable because he was never what he thought he should be. That's all.
Dean, stop bullying him and just leave him alone.
Yeah.
That actually came up multiple times. There's a nice puppy.
Leave me alone. I wish you'd leave me alone.
What do you think?
And in textbook bully fashion, Dean Blundell and his co-hosts, Lachlan Cross from 95.7 Cruise FM in Edmonton, and Chris Rook, pile on, join in the fun, and make fun of me for asking Dean Blundell to leave me alone.
I never talk about it. I have no idea who the fucking guy is, other than the fact that all he wants to do is stick his nose in my asshole, which is fine if he wants to. It's there.
It's so odd. It's creepy. It's kind of
It is creepy, isn't it? It's like stalkery.
Yeah.
When you brought him up last week, I didn't know about this connection, so I was surprised at your level, your aggression for him on the podcast.
Vitriol,
and it I think it surprised him as well, based on because I had a couple of people send me the Toronto Mike podcast where he's shitting on you, so I listened to it the other day, and I was
how was it?
Well, I just thought it was going to go away. But apparently
you had 7 hours to listen to it.
What did he say? I don't even know what he said. What did he say?
I think we've summed it up for the most part.
How was the quality of the broadcast?
Well, there's a guy that's why I was asking you if you knew his co-host. He's got a guy that jumps on with him apparently. Like, I've never heard of him either, and this is the first time I've ever listened to him, and his voice is fine, but the guy he had on with him has this Nardwar human serviette delivery.
Can you do that one more time so I can clip it for later?
Dude, it was harsh to listen to.
Hard to listen to, yeah.
Yeah, and the guy was smart and put words together well, but
hard to listen to. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there like that are like, and listen, if he calls himself some kind of radio critic, it's like being a fucking VHS critic now.
And
be kind and rewind.
Like,
it's like when you hear like a food critic that's never been a cook. Why would you listen to them?
A few things as we wrap this up. I've never referred to myself as a radio critic, so that's just something else they invented. I don't have a co-host. This is episode 1060-something. And although I had a co-host for the first 30 episodes, shout out to my dear friend Rosie, I have not had a co-host since. Mark Weisblad is my guest. And again, I invite him over the first Thursday of every month because, as that one co-host of Dean Blundell remarked, he's smart and he's well-spoken, and I find his takes on things fascinating. And they may not like his voice, but I do. Dean Blundell says Fearless Fred is his source for the lies about me photoshopping Fred's wife into the gangbang pictures and linking Fred to Martin Street's suicide. Again, if these things happened, it wasn't me. Fred has the wrong guy. I DM'd Fred on Twitter and told him such, but I never heard back. So a day later, I DM'd him again and said it was very important he call me. Fred never replied. Then the day after that, I publicly tweeted Fearless Fred, told him I had DM'd him my phone number, and asked him to please call. No response. I even called one of his radio colleagues that I'm tight with, asking this person to reason with Fred and to let Fred know it was very important we have this conversation before I drop this episode on Wednesday morning. Fred never responded. Fred, if you're listening, you have the wrong guy. And you've been confusing me with someone else since you arrived in Toronto back in 2009. I'm sorry someone photoshopped pictures of your wife into gangbang pictures, but that wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. I never once even referenced the fact you were married. It's not at all relevant to me, nor is discussing your personal family anything I'd ever do. Ask anyone who knows me. As for Martin Streak's suicide, I wrote a great deal about this. Never once did I suggest in any fashion that you had anything to do with it. This never crossed my mind. Again, you've got me confused with someone else. And when you say these things to Dean Blundell, for him to parrot on his podcast, it's libel. Please stop telling lies about me. If anyone has any questions whatsoever about any aspect of this story, please reach out. I'm mike@torontomike.com. I'm on Twitter as @TorontoMike. My DMs are open. Ask away. My hope here is that Fred Kennedy will realize he had the wrong guy and has been hating me for 13 years for absolutely no reason. That Fred stops sharing this fabricated story about me. And Dean Blundell stops his campaign of aggressive online bullying, his lies about me. He stops attacking me through his digital channels and leaves me alone. Fred and Dean, it's never too late to do the right thing. Correct the record and apologize. Now, as promised, to demonstrate that there's a pattern here, that Dean Blundell has been doing this to me for years, here's the piece of audio I dropped in the Toronto Mike feed in 2018. So that's 4 years ago. And I'm not going to edit a stitch. What you hear now is exactly what I recorded 4 years ago and what I put into the feed. The original plan was that I would drop this unnumbered episode into the Toronto Mike feed, and then after a week, I would delete it. That's why it never got a number. Obviously, I never did delete it. And even though at the time I recorded this, I did not intend to tweet about it or create an entry about it on torontomike.com, eventually I did write a post about it. Here it is.
What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto, where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto, where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto, Mike, we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love. I'm in Toronto.
Welcome to a unnumbered episode of Toronto Mike, a weekly podcast about anything and everything. This one's completely different because this episode does not exist. There's no tweet to support this episode. There is no guest in the studio, so there's no photo of me and the guest in the usual spot. There's no entry on torontomike.com where people can play the episode straight from the site. This unnumbered episode only exists in the feed for Toronto Mike. So if you're subscribed to Toronto Mike, you'll find this episode, and I don't know what I'll call it. I'm leaning towards calling it When Dean Blundell Attacks. Yeah, I think I might go with that one. It's growing on me. So what is this? Well, recently Dean Blundell, now if you know Toronto radio, you know the name Dean Blundell. He took over for Humble and Fred on 102.1 I'm going to guess this is like early 2001. That's from my memory, though. So, a reasonable facsimile of a copy of a copy. So I think early 2001, Humble and Fred leave 102.1 for brother station, as they called it, Mojo Radio 640, and they became the new morning show on 640. Dean Blundell was recruited, I suppose, from Windsor, where he was doing like a rock jock in Windsor, and he became the new morning guy. Jason Barr and Todd Shapiro, who were part of the Humble and Fred show, they stayed behind. I feel like at the beginning, maybe Sandra Plagakis was also staying behind. And before she moved on, I believe she's in Ottawa now. But Dean Blundell was on 102.1 for a long time. He left. There was great controversy when he left. You might remember he was suspended because of comments that were made when blind Derek Welsman was on that jury. And they made jokes and references to the jury that caused a mistrial. There was great controversy here. Some of the remarks were deemed homophobic, but I believe what got him in the end was simply like a straw that broke the camel's back, and Chorus canceled the Dean Blundell show. He eventually did resurface on 590, where he was the morning show host before he was let go from that gig. And as recently as today, I heard somebody pointed me to a tweet and an entry by Dean Blundell that he's going to be guest hosting on 1010, News Talk 1010, which is a Bell Media company. And he has a huge announcement to make, he says, Friday or Monday. I don't know which one, but who knows what that announcement will be. Personally, like as long as he's not going to announce that he's taking over for Matt Galloway on CBC Radio 1's Metro Morning, whatever he announces will have little effect on my day-to-day. So we'll see what that is. But Dean Blundell did podcasts. So after the 590 gig and before now, he discovered podcasting. So even though in the past he would shit all over podcasting, especially when Humble and Fred were doing it, it turns out he was into it because he recorded a number of podcasts. Recently, he recorded a podcast in which I came up. So I was pointed to this episode and was told, you need to listen to this. So of course I did. And I heard, I'm fine with him going at me, but the lies were too tough to chew. Like, I don't mind fair game and all, but if you want to go at things I did say or things I did or whatever. But this was completely unfair. So I was left with like, what do I do now? Blundell he recorded this podcast for public consumption. He released it into the public and he wrote about it on deanblundell.com because he wanted people to listen to his podcast. So he's gone to great efforts to put this in the public domain. I mean, he said it on the recording, so he knew what he was doing. And as he says in this episode, he was clean and sober for months, so he can't blame substances. He's of sound mind and body. And he puts this out there. And now what? People hear this, and of course, oh, Dean, why would Dean lie? This must be true. So I feel like I need an opportunity simply to rebut the things he said. So what I'm going to do in this episode, again, this episode that is unnumbered because it may disappear at any moment, and it's for subscribers only. I could pull it. I might not even post it. That's how unsure I am about this one. But let's do this. Let's listen to Dean on this episode when he goes at me, and then I'll pause and chime in periodically.
So Jerry called me today and said Mel and Adam said a bunch of nice stuff, had a nice interview, and then he said he asked how Todd was doing. I haven't talked to him in years, right?
Why would anyone think that you would be a good source of information?
You know,
on that?
It's interesting because a lot of people ask me about Todd, and it kind of full circle sort of came around this morning because a guy that podcasted with him for a long time, this guy Mike Boone. You know who Mike Boone is?
No.
Toronto Mike. You know who he is? Not really?
No.
He has, I don't want to say chase me down, but this guy has been relentless for like 20 years, critiquing pretty much everything I do. That seemed to stop. And,
Like for what?
Oh, like when I was at the Edge, the show sucks. He's a loser. He's this. He's that.
Yeah, but lots of people said that. But why does this?
All right, I'm going to pause it there just because I need to come in here and say this whole notion that for 20 years I've been hounding Blundell and telling him his show sucks. He's such a loser. I've never in my life, at least not on the blog or podcast, have I called him a loser. I've never said he sucks. I'm trying to figure out the root of this whole idea, and I think it comes down to the fact that when asked about Dean Blundell, I always answered with the truth. And in fact, I pretty much almost always use this exact term, but I would say he's not my cup of tea. Because he wasn't my cup of tea. I didn't like what I heard, so I didn't listen. But I sure didn't write entries about how much he sucks and what a loser he is. I've never done that. Now, I did one time in, I think, 2003 or something. George Strombo was filling in for the Dean Blundell show because they went on vacation or something. And I had a commute back then, and I tuned in to hear how Strombo sounded on the morning show. And Strombo sounded fantastic. He was just what I was looking for in a morning show. I liked the music. I liked what he would say about the music. It just felt great to hear this. And I wrote an entry on TorontoMike.com. It's still there, in which I kind of compared it to Lisa's substitute. And I said that, Strombo was Dean's substitute and really was really good. And I wasn't even bashing Dean because I always just say Dean Blundell's not my cup of tea. His show is not my cup of tea. But the Strombo fill-in was great. And that's kind of the closest I've ever come as far as I know. And you can tell me I've never deleted a Blundell entry. I've never called him a loser or said he sucks or gone at him at all the last 20 years. I hardly write about him because I don't listen to him, and I only just write like news updates like, okay, Blundell's the new guy at the Fan. They've canceled the Dean Blundell show. So that's a fact. This idea, I've hounded him the last 20 years. I've never met Dean. I've never talked to him on the phone. I have emailed him 3 times in the past 6 years since I started this podcast, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's let Dean pick it up and I'll come back.
And I know.
What does he do?
I don't know. I think he does a podcast. He's got a website where he talks about like media people and gets free stuff.
He's a podcaster.
Yeah, he's a podcaster.
Got it.
And I think does pretty well.
Yeah. Okay.
Clearly, because
you just called him. You just called him Toronto Mike.
Well, that's how that's what he goes by.
I know several Mikes in Toronto, so I didn't know what you were talking about.
No, it's you're thinking of Keswick Mike. Or
Sutton
maybe
Mike.
Hamilton Mike.
So Sutton Mike.
Are you thinking about Hamilton Mike? Anyway,
I know Mikes in Hamilton that hate you.
He has had like Humble and Fred on like 100 times, and he's had Todd on 100 times.
Okay, I'm coming in here because I'm laughing because, Humble and Fred have been on a lot. I think they've been on probably 5 times, maybe 6 times, but I guess that's a lot. But I have done 412 episodes. So, percentage-wise, it's not that much. They're not on that much. But here's the kicker. He's had Todd Shapiro on 100 times, okay? I've done 412 episodes of Toronto Mike. Todd Shapiro's been on precisely one of them. One time, episode 66 or something like that, Todd came over. It wasn't even a great experience. He made me make him breakfast and coffee. Like, he made me sort of like, he kind of was demanding all this stuff. It wasn't a great experience. Todd's never been back. I don't know how Dean Blundell came to this false conclusion that my podcast, I've had Todd Shapiro on hundreds of times. I don't know how one becomes hundreds. I know hyperbole is a big thing, so maybe if Todd was on 15 times, Dean might stretch that to hundreds of times, but one doesn't stretch to hundreds of times. But here's more Dean.
And all the questions are Dean-centric. They're all about me and how much of a bully I am and how terrible I am and all this other stuff. So he's asked me to be on his podcast like 100 times, and I said,
Okay, again, I don't know if Dean's just got this tick where everything is 100 times, like if this is just some default 100 times. I've asked him 3 times, and this is the truth. I don't delete a Gmail, so I can show you. When I started the podcast, I wrote him an email and invited him on. At some point, a couple of years later, I think he wrote back something like, thanks, but no thanks. And then a couple of years later, I wrote him again to say something to the effect of just checking it in if now is a better time and if you want to come on. The reason I felt Dean should have a fair chance to come on is because I do have a lot of 102.1 personalities on my show because that's the station I listened to throughout the 90s. So I have, by definition, I suppose, I've had many people on the show who have worked with Dean Blundell. If I have somebody like a Todd Shapiro or a Jason Barr or a blind Derek Wellsman or Josie Dye, I'm just running off these names on top of my head, Adam Ricard, of course, Danny Stover. If I have somebody like that on the show, I will ask about Dean Blundell, but I do that with every episode. I ask about these big personalities. I don't know if people have noticed, but when I have a 590 person on the show, I will typically ask about Bob McCowan. Okay? Same kind of deal. If I have a Q107 person on the show or somebody who worked cross paths with Derringer, I will ask about John Derringer. I ask about the big personalities in Toronto radio if you worked with them. I always do. So yes, of course, when I have Blind Derek on, I'm going to ask about Dean Blundell and Danny Stover. I'm going to ask about that, and even Humble and Fred at some point in their several visits, I will have asked about Dean Blundell. The whole episode of Shapiro is not about Blundell, but you can't have a one-on-one deep dive with Shapiro and not ask about his relationship with Blundell, because of course him and Barr were both let go before the show was canceled. Billy, that's another one. Billy from Mad Dog and Billy. She came on this show, and of course I asked her about working with Blundell because I had heard the things Blundell said about her when she was part of Mad Dog and Billy, and they were pretty horrific things. So I think what Blundell's getting at with that comment about that I'd like to have, I have these guests on hundreds of times so I can ask them hundreds of questions about bullying Dean Blundell. I've now had many, many guests on the show by this point. I've had many people come on and tell pretty bad stories about working with Blundell. This is not a positive experience for many of them. And they tell stories that are not kind to Blundell. And I always feel like it's only fair that Blundell has a chance to come on and defend himself and clarify things. It's only fair. So I did ask Blundell a second time if he wanted to come on the show. And again, he said no. And then I let it go until, this is only pretty recently, I think in the summer, Blundell wrote some blog entry about how he had quit drinking, he had cleaned up, and he was no longer consuming alcohol. And he was the new Dean. This is just prior to this, obviously, it all ties in a minute. It's just prior to this podcast that we're listening to from Blundell. So Blundell had cleaned up and was sober and was new and improved. And I wrote him a nice note, which he's going to talk about soon. So maybe I'll let him talk about it.
I'm not interested, but thank you. Very nice. And so he asked me again this week because we did our first podcast, talked about some important things in my life, and he said, hey, I'd love to have you on my podcast.
Oh, cool.
And then he says, please say yes.
Okay, coming in to say I have this email. I don't delete any emails that I send, and I did not say, please say yes. That is fiction.
So I, because I like getting back to people, I waited a week because I forgot. and then on my way down, I thought, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll kill two birds with one stone. We can invite this guy on. He can do a podcast with us here, and I'll give him the audio to play on his site. And he said, I don't know. I don't think so. Well, I'll read you what he said. He said he doesn't want to, but he would prefer if I came down to his studio in wherever he lives. And I said, not going to happen.
Right.
Because I don't.
And it's not, you mean because you just won't
put
that amount of effort.
That's too much effort for free. Right? So someone wants me to make that much of an effort so that they can get good content. I'm not doing anything for free.
You could come off here as playing it like cool.
No,
really, it's a lot.
It's a lot of work.
It's work.
Yeah. Listen, I got a 25-minute rule. If I can't get to something within 25 minutes in my car, I just won't do it unless someone gives me money.
If you could come to the place where I am going to be and doing that, I will do it with you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. Just so this email I wrote, and man, do I regret writing this email, because firstly, when I write an email to somebody, my Gmail address to his, I actually am stupid. Am I stupid? I guess I'm stupid that I think it's a private correspondence. So I don't think that he's going to post it somewhere public or read it in public. Now, he hasn't read it so far. He's been paraphrasing it, but I can tell you what I wrote, which was I said something to the effect of, I heard that you cleaned up and that you're new and improved, and I'm pleased to hear it. And then I think I invited him back on the show, and then I signed it off as I often sign my emails. I signed hope you say yes, Mike. And that was it. And then as he's explaining now, he invited me to come on his show, and I told him the truth, which is that's not how Toronto Mike works. He's got to come in. I do these things in my studio, and we can look each other in the eye and have a one-on-one honest deep dive, some real talk, as I call it. And I didn't care to come on his show so he could kind of edit it and carve it up and take it out of context and, belittle me and make me look stupid. The whole point of my show is it's unedited, and I can't carve it up and make you look stupid, because it the way it plays out is exactly as it happened in the room. And of course, I'm not out to get anybody anyways, so that's never a concern. But here's more Dean.
I thought it was what it was an olive branch to this guy, because he's been ruthless with me for years, like a lot of bloggers are, where they're, this guy sucks, that guy sucks. It's like this.
It sounds like he doesn't like your show, and there was a lot of people that didn't like your show.
Not many, but. Anyway, so he's
there was a lot more
me.
people not listening to you than there were listening to you,
and we agree to disagree. So this guy's chasing me down, and he's asked me 100 times to be on his podcast, and I keep saying no. So I offer him this opportunity. Listen, you can come on our podcast, ask your questions.
Our podcast.
It's our podcast.
Dan, do you get that 33%?
Matt, dude. I get 33% of the same 33% you get.
Yeah. I guess that's true. We're dividing nothing equally.
Yeah. 0 plus 0 is 0. Divide 0 by 0 all you want. You'll still get the 0.
I was asking myself that question because we were texting back and forth today. Okay, so everybody in? And as I'm coming in, I'm like, in for what? I'm like, what the fuck are we doing?
In for free.
I should tell you, the rather reasonable sounding person that's co-hosting with Dean Blundell is a gentleman named Zeke Myers, and I believe he owns or runs the Rebel nightclub in the Portlands there. And throughout, actually, I found him to be fairly reasonable. Like, he clearly doesn't know who I am or anything about my show, which is A-okay, because I would also say more people don't know who Toronto Mike is or about Toronto Mike than know, that is for sure. But he seems kind of balanced and fair throughout, even though he's obviously a good friend of Dean and co-hosting Dean's podcast.
But it literally is one of the only things I do for fun.
Yeah.
And I don't even know why.
You do other things for fun.
But I don't even know. But I make time for this, and I don't really even know why.
Because we're not friends and it's a good time.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's just
It's the only way I'll do stuff. And it was under 25 minutes for me to get here.
But it's out of character fun for me. Like I literally don't do
anything.
Stuff like that.
No.
Like anything performance-wise or public.
I'm really proud of you and your stance here, but can I finish my story? So this guy asked me to be on his podcast.
Hi, Lisa.
I've said no thanks. Hi, Lisa. How are you? And so, anyway, make a long story short, I say to him, listen, you can come on my podcast. You can put the audio on your thing if you like.
Yeah.
And so this guy who's been chasing me around,
you were
he's been saying all kinds of shit. Well, it's not even worth it. It's too much work, Zeke. I'm not getting paid to do that.
But it's factual. You'll be reading something.
Do you want me to read something?
Well, it's factual rather than... Because I don't want you to end up slamming
I'm not slamming
somebody.
the guy. Okay. This is from Mike. I heard the new episode. Very good. How about, God damn it. How about dropping, all these things come up when it says, do you want the Wi-Fi? Do you like the Phoenix Wi-Fi? How's the Wi-Fi? How about dropping by for an episode of Toronto Mic'd to chat about the new etc. Hope you say yes. I said, Mike, we are podcasting at noon today. You can join us by phone if you like. Ask your questions, and we will share the audio with your site. He says, this is pleasant. Very kind. Very kind. A lot of things have been called. Very kind is not one of them, so I enjoyed those 2 words.
Yeah, chiming in to talk about how ruthless I am. He called me ruthless, and wow, if I'm ruthless, I never personally attacked the guy. I said he's not my cup of tea. I doubt that's ruthless. There's a lot of broadcasters in this city that aren't my cup of tea. But in this correspondence, I'm glad Zeke asked him to read it, because the paraphrasing by Dean is, oh my God, is it just not hyperbolic, but just full of lies, just to make me seem like some kind of an asshole. But at least now that he's reading it, like, yes, my response to the offer to have me come on his podcast instead of him coming on mine, authentically was very kind. Like, that's a very kind gesture. And let's see what else I say.
But I'm recording an episode at noon, and I really prefer to have the guests over in person. Please let me know if you change your mind. P.S. Do you think you can unblock me on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm sorry. For me to kind of whatever, part of my role at Toronto Mike is, I do kind of report on where radio personalities are ending up and stuff. And I don't know if something goes down with the morning show on Virgin, I'll do a tweet or an entry or something about that. And that's what I do. And the fact that when people like to subtweet Dean a lot, this would happen. They're subtweeting Dean and they'll say something like, oh, here's big news from Dean. But I can't read the damn tweet because Dean has blocked me forever. So yes, I did throw in a PS again, I think I'm having a private correspondence here. I threw in a PS at the end of that email, if he could unblock me on Twitter, because it's a pain in the ass when you have these subtweets and you can't read them. And I think others who are blocked by people like that will empathize.
Woo! Anyway. So I say, well, we can move it to 11:15 and move you up. That's the best I can do. So then he takes the hard pass. He goes, I appreciate it, but I'm going to pass. Good luck. I root for all podcasters. A rising tide lifts all boats. I don't even know what that means.
I think that's clear. And the fact he doesn't know what that means is, take that for what it's worth. But true. Even if you're not my cup of tea, I actually would like you to be podcasting and have a successful podcast. This is true, because it really, especially a podcasting, a rising tide does float all boats. The more people who learn what a podcast is and how easy it is to subscribe to the syndicated content, that's another person who could potentially subscribe to your podcast. Like, they've now put their toes in the ocean, and then they're ready to dive in. So I sincerely believe that line is true. I believe it to be true that if Dean Blundell has success with podcasting, it's good for all podcasters.
Positive?
Sure. I said, anyway, should you be able to forecast all range of time to maybe come to you near in the future? Good luck. And that's what I said, which I won't because it's too far. But That was me saying, I'll do yours if you do mine, with no intention of doing his, and I just thought I should be rigorously honest there, that's all.
And I knew that, which is why I took a hard pass, because when I invite someone on and they say, oh, you can come on mine, I just didn't trust that he would actually come on mine, and I didn't want to go in his arena when I don't trust him at all, as far as I can throw him. So, yeah, I took the hard pass. I'm glad I took the hard pass. And that should have been it, to be honest. That was the last time I corresponded with Dean Blundell. And that really should have been it. I did not foresee this recording. I didn't see it coming, which is why I'm now talking about Dean, because he's kind of attacked me. And all I'm going to do in this little, subscriber-only episode is rebut.
I never had an intention of doing this podcast. Because what happens is this. A lot of people will take the things that we say.
You have a dizzying intellect.
I'm sober.
This started with Jerry D, right? Are you going back
Yeah, he
there?
called me today. Now he's going to come do a podcast with us next week. My kid prank called him. That's why it was a funny story.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did he? Your kid prank called me before.
Did he?
But not prank called me. Just dialed my number, and I heard your ex-wife disciplining your child.
Yeah, probably.
And over this whole conversation.
Seriously?
Your ex-wife picked up the phone and she went, Zeke, have you been listening the whole time?
When was this?
Oh, years and years ago. hit my number on your phone, right?
Did she sound annoying?
No, she laughed at the end of it. She's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. He must have been playing with the phone or something."
Yeah, and if you weren't on the phone, she wouldn't have said that. You would have heard screams of pain.
Oh,
I'm just joking.
Come now, children of the beast, be strong and shout at the devil.
Motley Crue.
Referencing Motley Crue today.
Right
on.
Very good. Yeah.
I'm even wearing the T-shirt.
Anyway, so that was my point, is that I'm trying to get Jerry on this. I'm not even trying. He just said, hey, I'll come and do a podcast with you next week.
Well, that's what I mean.
But then this guy, like, it's funny how this guy thinks that I'm going to drive like an hour to sit down with him and have him grill me when he's treated me like shit, apparently, and I just found this out a couple of years ago, for like 20 years.
But
and I thought,
I don't know.
Dean might want to check his sources that he just found out that for 20 years I've been treating him like shit, because it's mind-boggling how false that is.
Hey, so that's the role of a critic, I guess. You start this because...
He's not a critic. He's a guy that rides his bike and podcasts. He's a bike riding podcaster.
We're guys who drive cars and podcast. We do it because it's fun.
It's cute.
And he is enjoying doing a podcast on things. And he has, obviously with Toronto Mike being his handle, he is trying to, in his podcast, be Toronto-centric and the things that are popular in the city of Toronto. Probably also things that are controversial.
He uses it to get free stuff.
In the city of Toronto.
No, he uses it to get free stuff. That's what he does.
All right, I'm coming in again because Dean has said this now a few times, that I use TorontoMike.com to get free stuff. Wow, is that a lot? By the way, quick before I forget, I said Zeke Myers was running the Rebel. It's actually the Phoenix Concert Theater. Zach Myers is he's a partner in that enterprise and the booker there. So I just want to correct that mistake I made. But the whole idea that TorontoMike.com exists to get free stuff, a couple of things. One is I don't get much free. Honestly, I don't get much free stuff. Like, there's not much free stuff going on. I guess I borrow a car once in a while. Although now GM is closing up. Who knows if that's going on. But from Ford or whatever, I'm trying to think of what other free stuff I've had in the last couple of years. And not too much. Maybe the odd Wolfpack match. Do I think about the amount of time I've put into TorontoMike.com since, the late 90s? If I added it up, that is a lot of effort to get free Wolfpack tickets. That's all I'm saying there.
Ordinarily controversial in the city of Toronto.
No, I wasn't.
The other people around you will do his podcast, so of course it's pro them and anti you.
Yeah.
So I don't blame him on any of that stuff. It's just,
dude, all he did is have on people like Howard and Fred, who would just shit on me, and then Todd, who would shit on me but only passively shit on me and say the story's coming when there's no story.
Right.
Okay, I don't think Dean knows what literally means, because he just said he like literally what I do on this podcast is I have literally all I do in 412 episodes for over 6 years. Literally all I do is I have Humble and Fred and Todd Shapiro on my show to shit on him. This isn't Toronto Mike, apparently. This is the Dean Blundell Sucks podcast. And heck, maybe that would be a more successful podcast. Who knows? But if we added up the minutes spent talking about Dean Blundell out of the whole universe of Toronto Mike, that's a remarkably small percentage. But yes, again, when Todd came on the one time, and when Jason Barr came on the one time, and Billie Holiday came on the one time, and Josie Dye came on the one time, and Humble and Fred came on several times, and Blind Derek came on once, and Danny Stover came on twice. And in those episodes, yes, we do at some point talk about Dean Blundell.
Or Danny, our old producer. To shit. It's just, and it was this long line. At this stage of my life, we go back to that Mike Boone podcast we had earlier. I don't trust the guy, right? So I'm only going to do stuff with people I trust.
That was Toronto Mike you were talking
about.
Okay.
Where someone spends, lots of time defaming you and slandering you, and you look the other way. It's the same thing with Howard and Fred.
He spends a lot of time doing what you used to do.
No, because it's the pussy's way to do it, right? Like, if you're going to call someone something, at least stand there to their face and call them something.
You did it on
time out. If you're going to record a podcast for public consumption in your sober state that you will then share on deanblundell.com and release to the masses, hoping as many people as possible listen to it, all I ask is that before you make these grandiose, bold statements of fact, you spend even 30 seconds researching whether you're right or not. It wouldn't take long to realize, that podcast doesn't actually exist to relentlessly go at me. I mean, what kind of narcissist are we dealing with here? The most minimal, or even talk to somebody who actually listens to Toronto Mike. What is Toronto Mike about? Is this a big gotcha for Dean Blundell? What is it? It would take so little time to realize that's all nonsense. And this is not a relentless pursuit of him. And the blog, torontomike.com, which has probably 15,000 different entries that I've written over the last, 15 plus years, probably talks about Blundell, maybe, and 10 of them maybe. And maybe one time the Dean's substitute, the one about Strombo filling in. That's probably the harshest I got in terms of criticizing his work. And again, all I say is that he's not my cup of tea.
The radio.
Yeah, because no one could get me.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't remember
and
you
I'll still do it.
And the Beebs.
No.
Hanging out and you delivering those blows face to face.
I know. See, there's a lot there that I wouldn't go down that road anymore. What you just said, I wouldn't. There is so much meat on that bone of that comment. I would never, ever, ever take it there.
Right. But you want to.
Oh, so bad.
Yeah, he sounds like a changed man. Apparently, it was all the alcohol.
But I'm fighting the team.
I'm being evil. Like, I'm just prodding you. Come on.
Fighting demon.
Dance, monkey.
Once again, I could do a lot with that too. So my point is that I definitely listen. I'm not a happy feely. Oh, everybody, let's be friends guy. Don't get me wrong. I still have boundaries and barriers up, like the stuff with Fred and Howard. It's crazy. I forgot their names, because they don't particularly matter to me. But these guys verbally chased me down and took sound bites, I guess. You were the one that informed me of it a couple of years ago.
Yep.
And then they asked me to be on their podcast. Well, fuck no. I'm not doing that. Right. It doesn't mean you have to be a doormat if you're a nice person, right? And then
I don't think you proclaim yourself a nice person. I don't think you know if you're a nice person.
No. What did you just say? This incredibly warm, kind, nice person.
That's what my wife said.
Yeah, but you know me to be that too. I am. And I need to square that more with this. So these boundaries that I have are, I watched when...
I don't want you walking around saying Zeke Myers describes me as an incredibly warm, nice person. I do not want to be quoted as
honest to God, think I would ever say that in public.
Yeah.
So guys
I just want to set the record.
Guys like that, guys like Howard and what's his name, Mike, and then guys like Todd. And I've watched guys like these. I have an unfailing desire to never compromise myself. Unfailing. It will never. That is one thing that will never fail me.
The word unfailing is very strong.
Big time.
Never compromise myself.
I don't care
is ambiguous.
If no, it's not. I will never
I don't understand
compromise.
What you mean by that.
I will never compromise what I know and believe to be the right thing. And the right thing is, if someone keeps coming after me, I'm not going to help them. I'm not going to give them that time. A guy like, and I've had these conversations with various maybe possible employers in the future. Would you work with Todd again? Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because there was a Rubicon that was crossed. And it was, threats and all this. Yeah, it's a river. It's a Rubicon River.
And it ran right through it?
No, that's a Robert Redford movie. It's a river runs through it.
A boring
Brad
movie.
Pitt sat there forever, wouldn't eat his dinner. It was a great movie. Anyway, so I won't associate with those guys. It doesn't mean I have to hate them, because I don't hate them. And it also doesn't mean I have to wish them all the success in the world either. But I'm not like, I watched guys like, Howard and Fred. Fred would come in and say awful stuff about Howard. Todd would say awful stuff about Howard. And listen. And Howard and Fred. And then they would say stuff about other people. And
all right. This part is not about me, but it does kind of speak to the character of the man speaking, which is that it seems like his goal with this rant is to cause chaos. I would say he's trying to put some something between, again, full disclosure, Humble and Fred were at my wedding. I consider them both personal friends. I've helped them with their podcast, which has been well documented. And I'm actually going to see them tomorrow morning. And I root for their success, of course. I feel like I'm a part of that show. And they have been on several times. So I consider them personal friends. But that part there, this whole idea of, Fred talks shit about Howard to me privately behind Howard's back. Dean's putting this on a podcast right now. Like, he wants that out there. This whole, Todd, he's trying to, I guess, divide and conquer. Is that the term I'm looking for? He's trying to polarize. All he's trying to do is cause chaos. He wants to damage Humble and Fred's relationship. He wants to damage their relationship with Todd Shapiro. It's actually pretty fucking gross.
And then after everybody left, they all got together and magically they were friends. Magically, they're all friends shitting on me.
Yeah, but I thought that's not those three. That's this industry, man.
Nah, but it's the quality of character.
It makes strange bedfellows for sure.
Misery loves company.
Yeah,
right.
And I don't know if it's misery loves company.
No, it is to the point where even the same. No, I don't know if they do, but to the point where the same thing. It's. I had heard. Someone told me that this guy we used to work with, Jason and Todd, had become great friends, and I thought that's if I only told Jason what Todd said about his wife and kids when he wasn't looking.
Oh God, you're doing it right now.
No,
holy shit. Okay, and mad props to Zeke, who I don't know at all, never met. For you can almost hear in his voice, like he's sitting there and he's like, "Am I enabling this guy, this narcissist?" So good on you, Zeke. Well done. But what I'm hearing there, like, talk about the polarizing, dividing, causing chaos. He's now basically, obviously, again, all allegedly, and we already know he's said many, many big lies on this podcast. So I wouldn't believe anything he said, to be honest. But he is suggesting that in private, Todd Shapiro has said horrible things about Jason Barr's wife and children. And again, I don't believe that anything Dean says is true. But in a world where that is true, and that was said privately, who puts that on a podcast that's being recorded for public consumption? Remember, I didn't hack into his voicemail and grab his voicemails. I'm not reading his emails. This is not a secretly recorded conversation because somebody was wearing a wire. This is Dean and Zeke in a studio recording an episode of Dean Blundell's podcast that he could share with the Dean Blundell faithful and the masses on deanblundell.com. And again, he's completely clean and sober. And as he says in this episode, he's been sober for months. And he apparently has realized that, to be a nicer guy. He's had this epiphany of some sort. So this is actually after he stops drinking and decides to be a nicer guy. That's what we're hearing now. And he's trying to make Jason Barr aware that Todd Shapiro is saying who knows what about his wife and kids. And that's fucking gross.
Because I couldn't do that. I couldn't look at someone that I was shitty to, behind their back or not. Mm-hmm. Couldn't do it. And so I have a barrier and I have a line that is not going to be part of my life, and I'm going to focus on these good things.
Such a slippery slope. Look, at the end of the day, I don't listen. I listened to Todd's show when a fan wrote a note with a link to a section of Todd's show. I didn't. And it was, are you guys going to respond to this? So naturally you press play. Mm-hmm. And I pointed it out to you, and at that time, and this is 2 years ago, we both said no. Like, why would we even
talk about this?
So I just sent an email back to the person who had asked the question saying, no. Like,
can we do a podcast?
Yeah, it's nothing about Todd. It's nothing about.
Yeah.
And if people don't like if people want to say what we're doing is terrible, okay, that's fine. It's absolutely fine. Mm-hmm. I don't think you and I are here to be great.
No.
I don't think this, and for anybody who's listening, if we've kept you this whole time and you've had the thought that this was the pursuit of greatness,
no.
You've been grossly misled, and I'm terribly sorry. I apologize for wasting hours of your time.
You know, it's funny, too, that you bring that up because, you know, you have people because of DeanBlundell.com, and it's been, according to page views, very successful.
Yeah.
But according to balance sheets, I haven't sold it because I have no desire to sell it.
But are you enjoying it?
Love it.
Done.
Love it.
That's it.
Love it.
That's it.
Because
so why do we have to respond to any of this stuff? Or use it as content?
Well, take it out.
Yeah, like I just wonder why you...
Because you know why? Because well, then don't take it out. But the reason why is because I want people to know that as nice as I am, incredibly nice, I also have a very hard line when it comes to people's lies and people's bullshit and hypocrisy, which was the original. Do you see how I've come full circle?
You know, have you ever unintentionally been hypocritical?
Not that, no.
It's never been pointed out to you?
Nope.
I have.
I don't know.
I have had an opinion on something and then had a different opinion later.
That's called evolution.
And been pointed out that or that me doing this is very similar to something that I'm criticizing. And it's like, yeah, okay. Oh, I guess I am. So I don't think you have to be evil to be hypocritical. I think you can learn from your own hypocrisy. And for me, in this whole conversation is like, who cares? I think it's funny that somebody who bashes you said, hey, you should come on the show.
That was the point.
Why don't you come on the show?
But I'm not bringing any of these guys up to get on the backs of their enormous success since they've all left radio.
It's a weird thing to say.
But what I'm saying is that there's a reason why I'm not doing the Dudes podcast. And there's a reason why.
It's schizophrenic, right? Like, but outside of this world, outside of talking behind somebody's back, think of it in clear conversational context, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're a loser. You're terrible. Do you want to hang
out? Yeah. I hate.
I'm just chiming in again. And I've already been clear that I actually didn't do You're a Loser. And I didn't even do You're Terrible. I think I did Your Show Is Not For Me, which is true. Heck, this podcast I'm listening to now as I record it is not for me either. But the hangout part, I just want to address that. And I have to book, I don't have to, I want to book guests on my show. So all the time I'm inviting people and scheduling them. This is actually the hardest part of the Toronto Mic'd experience is, wrangling the guests and getting them to confirm. I have a phone call with Maestro Fresh West later today for something I'm working on. And there's just a bunch of balls in the air all the time when it comes to, guests and scheduling and stuff like that, and invitations and stuff like that. And who I want on, it's people I'm interested in talking to, but not necessarily people I'm fans of. There are definitely guests I've had on and guests I will have on that I wouldn't say I'm a fan of their work. I think they'd be an interesting episode. So when I invited Dean 3 times, it wasn't because I was a fan of his work. It was because I think it would be an interesting discussion because we could do some real talk. We could talk about the 102.1 experience. We could talk about the whole fan thing. We could talk about, again, on that third email that he read part of, we could talk about his newfound sobriety, and I could ask him, about things that he said publicly. It would be interesting. So I'm not actually doing a whole, there's no hypocritical nature here. It's all very authentic and straight up real talk. And that it's not, you suck, you're terrible, let's hang out. I don't have any desire at all to hang out with Dean Blundell. And after I heard this recording he did with Zeke, I lost any inkling of desire to have him on Toronto Mic'd. There won't be a fourth invitation to Dean Blundell to come on Toronto Mic'd. If he's always welcome to write me. My DMs are open. My email address is on torontomike.com. Anybody can write me, and I read everything. And I pretty much reply to everything, I think. So Dean's always welcome to write me an email, and I will read it and write back. But there will be no instigation by me in this regard That's done.
Hate you. I've hated you for 20 years. Can you help me with my podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Right.
And that was the same thing when those guys asked us to be on.
That is worth investigating.
It's schizophrenic almost, and I say that with no disrespect to people with schizophrenia or any type of
any other
multiple
differently
personality
able
disorders
or differently abled in any way.
No.
Yeah, it's not weird, and it's most definitely. Yeah, and again, you can't joke. There's people listening who have loved ones who are suffering from schizophrenia, and there's no joke in there. But just to use the word weird. There is nothing weird about me having Dean Blundell on the show. Again, I'll watch 60 Minutes, and you'll Morally Safe or whoever will have an interview with an evil dictator. This is not an endorsement. This is having a conversation about it. You're talking to somebody who is newsworthy or interesting, not somebody who's to be celebrated and worshipped.
Differently abled.
That's differently abled. But I'm just giving context. It's not content. I'm giving context to what we're saying.
Cam agrees with me, right?
I'm right again. Thank you. I'm just giving context to that. Hey, this podcast. I've offered this guy the opportunity to come on this one because I'm nice. And
no, because you're lazy.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. But listen, if you've been shitty to somebody in your life, don't expect them to help you. That's my point, right? If you've talked poorly about
you're using the word help, and he's going to take issue with you using the word help.
Why do you think he has people that have been in this industry on all the time?
Well, he's trying to have...
He's a paperclip.
He's trying to have content.
Yeah. And does he provide great content, or do the people he has on provide?
His perspective on this city will provide great content when he battles it out with you or when he discusses things with you.
That's why he won't come on this podcast, because he don't.
But that's what I mean. It's less altruistic when he's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!
Yeah,
I want to be the source." None of this makes any sense in the first place, though, because if you say somebody is a loser,
or they suck,
a bad person,
or you
or
try
terrible,
or a bully, all that stuff.
Why do you want to hang out with them?
Bully. I don't know Dean Blundell. I never worked with Dean Blundell. I've never met Dean Blundell. I don't speak of things I don't know. When guests come on and they paint the picture of a workplace bully, that is the perspective of the guest. I am not in a place to tell a guest that they're wrong. I wasn't there. This is a guest's perspective. And this is actually a core reason why I felt it was only fair that Dean get an opportunity to come on Toronto Mic'd, because yes, several people had come on and basically painted a lousy picture of him. And he should have the right to rebut. He wasn't in the room when these things were said. Let him come in and we can talk about it. But that word help, I never thought, Dean will help. I don't have this thought of, that's going to get monster ratings. And no, that's not really how the podcast world works. Like, maybe you get these one and dones, but I'm actually looking for like subscribers who will kind of invest their time long term and sort of will be equally as likely to listen to, I don't know, an episode about Tom Thompson or the Tom Wilson episode than they will when Dean Blundell comes on or whatever. So I'm actually kind of looking at a more like long-term holistic approach to this thing. And I'm not looking for some big bang that'll get me help, as he says. Early on, I think the first time I wrote him, it was probably right after the Shapiro thing, because that was like early days of having guests on this show. And I think at that time I was all like, I got to be all like 60 Minutes here and give him a chance to come on or whatever. But I've never really thought of when I asked Dean on, is because I think he'd be interesting. But I have lots of people on. And if you go to torontomic.com and you click notable guests or notable episodes, I think I called it, at the top of the website, there's a nice, easy to browse list of people who have come on, from Ron McLean to Strombo to... Dave Hodge to Roger Ashby to Dwight Drummond and so forth, to Maestro Fresh West. So a lot of people come on. I don't consider it help. I just consider it part of the, this passion project, if you will, the Real Talk experience. But back to Dean.
That's weird.
Because You know why? Because people are weak. People are weak-minded, and it's easy to be weak and look for friendship in misery. It
Dan,
really
are you
is.
good at writing people off out of your life? If you just realize, oh, that's the way that person is, can you live tomorrow on without that person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had to do that.
Yep.
Luckily not in the last
Do you enjoy
10,
it?
15 years, but...
Do you enjoy it?
No, it sucks, right?
That's where we're different.
See, I'm totally different. I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's why we get along.
Yeah, it's a light bulb that goes off in your head, and you're like, oh, taker user.
What a great investment I've made in not allowing them to do that to me anymore.
I've invested in this as a relationship or friendship or employment or partnership or whatever I've invested in.
Yeah.
Oh, I get it. You're a taker. You are going to try to win at our relationship.
And I will not be taken advantage of anymore.
And I don't want to have any relationships that are based on winning.
No.
Can't win a relationship.
Bingo.
And that's the whole thing here is this. You have said you don't like this person. That's it. That should be.
And
the
I'm
end of
not
that
going to
statement.
change. That's the part that and you know the whole thing about grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can. The
and
wisdom
to
know the difference
between them.
That's the thing. Is that I have serenity in my life, knowing that I don't want hypocrisy or
so you have serenity now
or weak-minded
serenity now.
Whoa.
Seinfeld reference. Serenity now.
Are you supposed to yell it?
Serenity.
It wasn't specific.
Serenity now, insanity later.
But Braun, you're hot.
You're on fire, Costanza.
Still the greatest show ever. But that, in closing, let me just point this out.
Festivus
Is
for the
that
rest of us.
is that it's time for feats of strength. You and Dan have to wrestle. The airing of grievances. I love Seinfeld. Anyway, in closing, let me just say this, is that you can become a better person and still have parameters that you live by because you are committed and convinced that the people that are faucets and there are people that are drains, right? The people that are drains won't get another faucet in their life that's worth it because all they do is take. So you can decide to be a faucet or a drain in your life.
And that's it, I think, in terms of there's a chunk. The reason there was a gap, you might have noticed an edit break earlier on. I had to carve out a big chunk where he went at, and I won't name the person or even the gender, so no one can figure this out. But he told a story, kind of like when he was going at Humble. He was going at Fred, he was going at Todd, he was going at Jason, and he went at somebody else, and he made these statements that were more fucking gross than anything else you heard in that episode, and were so basically I wasn't, he hosted that content in the public domain. I wasn't going to do that, so I carved it out. But everything else was just basically the conversation about yours truly, and I just wanted to respond. So again. A lot of fibs in there, a lot of lies, a lot of unfair statements, and a lot of mistruths. And Dean Blundell is a popular public figure in this city, and people will hear his podcast and take his word for everything. And what am I, so what was I left to do except what I just did here? So that brings us to the end of this unnumbered episode, which may disappear at any time. The reason I'm keeping it unnumbered is so it can disappear into the abyss, and nobody will be the wiser. But thanks for listening, and we'll be back with a regular episode. Festivus is here, and I can't wait for a visit from Elvis for episode 413.